What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. A couple of weeks ago I made a video talking about the top 5 gym defenders in Pokemon Go, but I have to say, there ended up being a lot of normal type Pokemon on that list, and a lot of people had so many other suggestions that are fairly good in the gym system. So I decided to go ahead and create a video talking about the top 5 alternative gym defenders in Pokemon Go. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the list. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and give a huge shout out to GamePress for writing an article talking about the best gym defenders. If you are interested in this and want to see a little bit of a broader list, I highly recommend you to check out the link in the description once you watch this video. So let's go ahead and get into the number 5 spot. By the way, it is going to be ordered by CP and not necessarily the best gym defender. In at number 5, we have Steelix. Max CP of 2,439. Steelix is a dual type of, well, steel and ground. Yep, didn't see that one coming. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. First things first, a red flag from an attacking perspective is going to be that attack stat, ranking out at 213th. Unfortunately, we don't see as many people using a Steelix. I actually like the model and like battling with it just because of the way that it looks, and it's also a really cool Pokemon. It's just unfortunate that it didn't work out as well from an attack standpoint. But guess what? With defending gyms, you don't necessarily have to have a high attack stat. Check out that defense stat at 333, ranking out at 4th in Pokemon Go. That is magnificent for Steelix. Let's go ahead and talk briefly about some pros and cons. So when you're talking about the pros, firstly, we need to talk about the idea that it does have some pretty good bulk and a low CP range. But beyond that, if you will check out what it's going to be fairly good counter to, the idea behind it is that there are some very good meta-relevant Pokemon that people may want to attack with. But versus Steelix, they're going to have a little bit of some trouble. But keep in mind, it is going to be dependent on the moveset that you select, but we will cover that shortly. When we're talking about the cons, there's going to be the idea that fighting fire and water is going to be very good counters to Steelix, and those are fairly common counters, mostly for the fact that a lot of people tend to put normal types in the gyms. So if you have some type of issue versus fighting, then it could kind of be able to take out 2 Pokemon pretty much at once, and then some of the other types kind of fall into that as well. Once again, this is going to be a Pokemon, like a couple on this list, where once the moveset becomes figured out, it's going to be much easier to deal with. But honestly, I think you could say that about most Pokemon. So let's go ahead and take a look at that best moveset. You can technically use Dragon Tail or Iron Tail, Crunch, or Heavy Slam. Don't worry about the ground side of things, just focus on this. Personally, Dragon Tail actually works out very well. Let's go ahead and get into the number 4 spot. And that is Lapras with a max CP of 2,603. Lapras is a dual type of water and ice. Lapras is definitely going to be a fun Pokemon to put in the gym, and it's going to be solid because of the specific stat of stamina. At 260, it ranks out at 9th in Pokemon Go. And then if you check out that defense stat, that's really not too bad. The only red flag for Lapras is going to be its attack. But once again, you do not need an attack stat to be successful from a gym standpoint. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a look at the pros, cons, and the best moveset. So when we take a look at the pros, there's going to be quite a few that are worth mentioning. You have the combination of the ice and water type damage versus the optimizing of the counters, which we will talk a little bit about that moveset in a few minutes. But nextly, you have the threat of Ice Beam, Blizzard, Hydro Pump, and Surf that's going to keep first-time attackers cautious. Assuming that they know enough about Lapras, basically the idea behind it is maybe if someone sees a Lapras, they're going to go, okay, nope, that's going to take way too much time to do, and maybe they're not going to be as likely to do it. So when we're talking about the cons, unfortunately it is going to have some vulnerability to electric, and more importantly the fighting type. Like I said, with fighting type weaknesses, we have to be so careful because most people tend to put normal types in the gym. And this Pokemon unfortunately falls victim to figuring out the moveset. Once it's figured out, it's going to be a little bit easier to handle the second time. But beyond the pros and cons, when you're talking about the best moveset to use, I personally think doing something that's going to be one ice type move and one water type move is going to be your best bet. Just remember that there are some legacy moves on this, But whatever you choose on the front end, Ice Shard or Frost Breath, I would focus on using something like Surf, for instance, as the charge move. You're going to get the most coverage out of it, and it's going to make it a little less predictable than having something like a double Ice moveset. Let's go ahead and move into the number 3 spot, and that is Milotic. Max CP of 2,967. Milotic is a pure water type. Of course, Milotic is going to be a little bit on the rarer side because of everything you have to do with, for instance, walking Feebas the 20 kilometers with your buddy. So if you're going to do all of that work, it's unfortunately not that great of a water type attacker. So it's actually going to work out fairly well on this list because it's going to give Milotic a purpose in Pokemon Go. Let's go ahead and talk about why this Pokemon is going to be such a good option. Specifically taking a look at the stamina at 190, ranking out at 38th, and the defense at 242, ranking out at 19th. Overall ranking of 24th in Pokemon Go. Once again, it is unfortunate that the attack stat is not higher. But if you check out that stamina, check out that defense, this is the first Pokemon that we've seen on this list that checks off both boxes in those categories and does very well. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the pros and cons. When we're talking about the pros, there is going to be that impressive bulk that we talked about. Next, it's going to be powerful, diverse movesets, and it's going to be something that we'll talk about once we get into that. But then next, we need to take a look at just kind of like what Milotic is. It's taking the best parts of a Lapras, Vaporeon, Gyarados rolled into one Pokemon. So we did see Lapras earlier on this list, but for Milotic, like I said, it's not just going to have a high stamina, it's also going to have a high defense. So it could actually be a fairly good performer. Let's go ahead and take a look at the cons. It's going to become less threatening once the moveset is figured out. That is going to be a common theme that you will see throughout this list. But despite its performance, its defensive typing doesn't cause many switches. For instance, most people are just probably going to use an electric type moveset and then just, attack Milotic. That's going to be a little bit of the risk that you run when it is just going to be a pure type Pokemon. When we're talking about this best moveset, if you honestly want to change it up a little bit to try to get a little bit more coverage, it might be smart to use something like a Dragon Tail instead of a Waterfall. You might throw people a little bit off guard, and you could kind of do the same thing with Blizzard. But if you're wanting to go for the most kind of effective moveset, Waterfall and Surf would be really good, considering Surf is going to be a 2-bar charge move. But by all means, go ahead and pick whatever you think is going to be best. Let's get into the number 2 spot, and that is Donphan, max CP of 3,022. Donphan is a pure ground type Pokemon. Donphan is definitely going to be an interesting Pokemon to talk about, mostly in regards to the moveset, which we will cover once we head up to the pros and cons section. But for the most part, go ahead and check it out. It is going to be a very well-rounded Pokemon from a statistical standpoint. You have a decent stamina, a decent defense, 214. The attack stat is actually 214th as well. But unfortunately, from a ground typing, you have something like a Groudon that definitely outshadows it. But let's go ahead and take a look at some pros and cons for Donphan. When we take a look at the pros, it can cause as many switches as Steelix but has fewer weaknesses. For instance, you're going to basically have a lot of people switching out the Pokemon constantly when they go up against something like a Donphan versus the typical Pokemon in a gym. The next pro is going to be related to the move Play Rough. As we talked about before, typically most people are going to use Fighting type. Fighting type is weak to Fairy. So this is going to be a case where you can at least have a super effective moveset against a fairly predictable Pokemon typing. And then lastly, its most optimal counters aren't ideal for generalized gym offense. So basically, once again, the Pokemon that typically end up in a gym aren't always good against ground typing, kind of putting Donphan into a position where someone has to pick a specific Pokemon to battle against it. But let's go ahead and look at the cons. Its most optimal moveset is going to be predictable and does poorly against water and grass type counters. So yes, if someone is smart enough to use it against a ground typing, they would use water and grass. But like we talked about, yes, I understand that the moveset is going to be predictable, but not everyone necessarily knows that you would be using a fighting and fairy type. So I do think that Donphan is still going to be at least an interesting Pokemon that is going to have some value defending gyms. Let's go ahead and get into the number 1 spot, and that is Dragonite, max CP of 3,581. Dragonite is a dual type of dragon and flying type. Let's go ahead and take a look at these stats. It is well known that Dragonite is a monster from an offensive standpoint, but believe it or not, if you check out that stamina and defense, it's actually not ranked out that bad either. So Dragonite is one of the few Pokemon that's going to be good for attacking and good for defending gyms, and the fact that it's not a legendary means that you can put it into the gym no problem. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the pros and cons and take a look at the ideal moveset. When we talk about the pros, go ahead and take a look at that unique defensive typing limits optimal counters to Fairy and Ice type. Of course, I guess you could use Dragon typing as well, that wasn't mentioned on the list, but the fact that you have Fairy typing, most people don't attack with Fairy, and the fact that there isn't a Fairy quick move kind of limits people from kind of stepping away from that. And then on the other end, you have Ice types. There's not a lot of great Ice type attackers. Maybe something like a Jinx or an Articuno would be really the only options until Generation 4 gets here. Other than that, you have that Dragon type counters may take heavy damage in defeating Dragonite. So not only is Dragonite going to be able to take some hits, because it is such a good Dragon type Pokemon, it's going to be able to put that damage up against a Dragon type if people use a Dragon type. So beyond that, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the cons. It's countered so heavily by Ice types that it may not be able to use its charge move. Well, once again, that's going to be dependent on what charge move you've set, which we will talk about. And then lastly, it's going to be the Fairy types both deal effective damage and have double resistance to Dragonite's Dragon type attacks. But honestly, I don't think that's as big of a con. Maybe some people will use a Gardevoir, but you're not going to not put Dragonite in just for the idea that someone could end up with a Fairy type attacker. So when we talk about the best movesets, of course Dragon Claw is going to be a legacy move, and it is a 3-bar. That's fantastic to put as Dragonite. So if you're not worried about getting off a charge move with Dragon Claw, I don't really know what you can do about it. But beyond that, you also have the idea of having Outrage, which is going to be a 2-bar charge move. Personally, I think Dragonite's going to do a fantastic job for you, and because of the fact that it did have a community day, hopefully you do have quite a few of them. So before we end the video, I actually wanted to put in a bonus Pokemon that is going to be super annoying to battle against, and that is Wobbuffet with a max CP of 1024. Wobbuffet is a pure Psychic type. The reason why Wobbuffet is so annoying to battle against is going to be because of its stamina stat. This is basically going to be the equivalent of a poor man's Blissey. I am not encouraging you to invest Stardust in a Pokemon like this, but if you do catch it above level 30, then by all means use it. It's going to take quite a bit of time to battle against, and something that an attacker is going to get very annoyed with. Let's go ahead and end with a question of the day. What is your favorite Pokemon to drop in the gym if you actually care about doing that? Go ahead and leave it in the comments section below, and I will see you next time.
Hit me like a tidal wave.